It's hard not to feel sorry and angry about what's happening in the British Parliament. Sorry that a Prime Minister who finally wants to make Brexit a reality is doing it so tough, and angry that the Parliament is totally obstructing the democratically expressed will of the people. Whatever your view on Brexit, as you know, I supported it from the outset, whatever your view, there was a referendum, the biggest vote in British history, and the people's choice, 52% to 48%, was to leave the European Union, despite a ferocious and indeed dishonest campaign by the establishment to stay. But because the establishment lost out, they've now done everything they can to thwart the people's decision becoming a reality, and done everything they can to engineer another vote in the hope they get the decision they wanted all along. Now, that's not how democracy works or should work, if we even want to call it democracy at all. You don't get to keep forcing the people to vote until you get the outcome you want. That's called a tyranny, and Britain and Europe too have had a pretty bloody history dealing with tyranny, and the establishment here should remember it's usually them who come off second best, indeed sometimes without their heads. We all know that Theresa May's government first said that no deal was better than a bad deal. We all know that parties claiming to back Brexit won about 80% of the vote at the last election. We all know that the Parliament voted overwhelmingly to trigger the lengthy leave process. Yet overnight, with a bill to ban a no-deal Brexit passed, and with Boris Johnson's bill for an election failing to get the required two-thirds majority because of sneaky tactical abstentions by Labor, it's hard to know what will happen next. My instinct is that once the Lords sign the bill to ban a no-deal Brexit into law, Labor will then back an election on October 14. But putting the specifics of the Brexit issue to one side, what this sorry episode has just highlighted, not just to Brits, but anyone living in a similar democracy around the world, is how aggressively those in power can conspire against the voter to stop happening what they don't want to accept. When I say those in power, of course I mean MPs, but also business and cultural elites, the dominant voices in our media, anyone but the quiet Australian. Need some examples? Well, how about the times over and over again that the Australian people have voted for parties that want our power supply to be affordable and reliable? Every time there's been an election with power prices front and centre, the people have voted for that. Against a massive campaign to the contrary, they voted in 2013 to repeal the carbon tax, as they have voted similarly to repeal carbon taxes in Ontario, Canada, and only recently in Alberta as well. In May, they voted against Labor's 50% renewable energy target and uncosted emissions policies. But even with these pro-energy results, how often have state Labor governments been elected promising, say, better schools and hospitals, only once elected to legislate for 50% unreliable and expensive renewable power, or other things that people never had a say in, like changes to gender laws? In the case of the Berejiklian government in New South Wales, which was elected promising good management and more roads and infrastructure, who knew about planned changes to abortion law, including sex selection terminations and late-term abortions? Indeed, the Premier herself admitted her plan for radical abortion law reform was deliberately kept from the electorate before the March election. Half-smart commentators often wonder out aloud, how on earth do we end up with someone like Donald Trump? I'll tell you why. We end up with people like Trump because the politicians we had treated the voters who elected them with contempt. And the Morrison government shouldn't think it could never happen to them, quiet Australians or not. Today, ministers were out trumpeting a cut of 30,000 to immigration numbers. We've seen poll after poll where Labor, Coalition and indeed Green voters want a cut in our migration numbers. But the government's trumpeting a cut today? Come on, stop trying to fool me. Well, there's been a cut, or 30% fewer approvals for permanent residency, meaning the overall cap of about 160,000 permanent migrants is in place. That's not how many migrants were in Australia last year or in recent years. Instead, try numbers exceeding 230,000. That's because the only number here that matters is net overseas migration, which means everyone coming in for more than 12 months at a time and who therefore need a house, a job, and who add to traffic congestion in our big cities. Net overseas migration, the only number that counts, last year and in recent years has been at near record levels. The lessons for us in Australia on Brexit aren't how the people of Britain eventually exit the EU or not. It's what happens to once great democracies when the establishment conspires to treat democracy with contempt. And this is why we all need to watch what's happening offshore closely and learn the lessons to fight back here at home.